I'm going to show a picture, and I want to see if anybody can guess what this is from. Does anybody know what that's from? Maybe you can see it up at the top. That dog is so sad looking, isn't it? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to depress us as we begin today. Does anybody remember? Yeah, that's it. In 2007, I thought this was like 2000. I thought I was still in high school when this was going on, but it was 2007. I was like 23 years old, and I remember the first time I saw this ad for the ASPCA, the Association of People Against Cruelty to Animals. That's what this was for. And this song starts playing. It's Sarah McLachlan. And the song is, in the arms of the angel, in the arms of an angel, fly away. You remember that one? Okay, and then it just starts showing all these super sad pictures of animals. I thought about showing you the one-eyed cat, but I decided against it. My better angels prevailed. But it's all these pictures. And I remember, like, I was 23 years old, and I remember, like, I was glued to this thing. And it was making me feel like it was hitting me gut level. And I'm going to tell you something. I don't even like animals that much. I know that's a character flaw that I need to work on because Jesus loves animals. He created all of them. Like I'm telling you that to my shame. But I remember watching this ad and I am feeling something. 23, maybe getting a little misty-eyed, like, these poor animals. First time I watched it, couldn't turn away. But then the ad was so successful, it just started running all of the time. I know a lot of our kids don't understand commercials and stuff, but it was just popping up all the time. And after the first time, as soon as it would come on, click. I ain't watching that again because I don't want to feel that. I don't want to feel the way that's making me feel. The reason why they ran that ad so much, by the way, is because it raised like $30 million in 2 years. This month we're talking about doing what Jesus did because that's part of what it means to be a disciple or a follower of Jesus. And if we truly follow Jesus, it's going to cause us to see what he sees and to feel what he feels. And I think that the compassion of Jesus, which I think that's what I was feeling, by the way. This old stone heart was feeling some compassion for those animals. It was a feeling, and I had to turn it right. I think the compassion of Jesus is something that for some of us, myself included, we've learned to kind of click it off when we don't feel like feeling it. If we're really going to lean into having the compassion of Jesus, it's going to make us feel. And I want to ask this question and hopefully come back and answer it at the end. It's kind of 3 questions bundled as one. But what happens when individuals and churches lose the ability to have the compassion of Jesus? And what does that do to us spiritually when we're no longer feeling what Jesus feels? And what about the people who desperately need us to feel compassion toward them? What's happening to them? So, I think this text that we're going to read, it answers a pretty important question. What does Jesus do when he encounters the brokenness of the world? I think Matthew shows us. Matthew 9. We're going to read it together. Jesus went through all the towns and all the villages, and he was teaching in their synagogues, and he was proclaiming the good news of the kingdom. And he's healing every disease and every sickness. And when he saw the crowds, notice that, he sees something. Some of us have lost our ability to see. We've learned how to ignore the things that are in front of us. He saw the crowds. He had compassion on them because they were harassed and they were helpless. They're like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. I want us this morning to slow down before we get into a couple things. I want us to notice two crucial layers at work here. I want us to see first, because we're reading this out of Matthew 9, but I want us to see first where this falls in the timeline of Jesus' ministry. And then there's a really important callback to the Old Testament in this reference as well. First thing, this passage ends a major phase of Jesus' ministry that actually kicked off in Matthew 4:23. Matthew, he kicks off a phase of Jesus' ministry with these words in Matthew 4. And I want you to notice how similar they are to what we just read. This is on purpose. Matthew is trying to bookend a phase in Jesus' life and ministry. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. Sounds a lot like what we just read in 9:35, right? That's because Matthew is showing us at the end of chapter 9 that 4 through 9 represent about a year or so of Jesus' first year in ministry. And he's going about, he's proclaiming the gospel, he's healing the sick, he's demonstrating the kingdom, he's showing compassion on the crowds. And I bring this up because after a year of doing ministry, this is what Jesus sees. As he's gone from village to village, town to town, he sees the brokenness of the world. In his first year, after doing all this good, what he comes away with is these people really need a shepherd. Which brings us into the Old Testament reference that's important. Sheep without a shepherd. That is a clear callback to the Old Testament. One of the storylines in the Old Testament is how God calls a group of people unto himself. That people is called Israel. If you know this, amazing. But part of what's happening in your Old Testament is God, through a man named Abraham, decides, I'm going to have a people. They're going to become a nation. It's going to be the nation of Israel. Their purpose is going to be a blessing to the world. And they're going to be a blessing to the world by bringing forth the Messiah, Jesus, okay? But in the process of that, this nation that God has called unto himself, they do something really silly. A couple hundred years in, they start looking at all the nations around them and they decide, hey, those nations have a king. We want to have a king ourselves. They have a leader. We want a leader for ourselves. And the Lord says, this is a terrible idea. I want to be your king. But they reject God as king and request a human king. So the Lord gives them what they want. You should be careful what you ask the Lord for. You should. Because the Lord gave them what they wanted, a human king. And in the history of Israel, of all these human kings, there are very few kings that are actually any good. Most of them are terrible. Now, when we're speaking about shepherds, God uses that term to describe the leaders of God's people in the Old Testament. And some of these are kings, some of them are prophets, some of them are priests. But the truth is, most of them fail eventually. One of the chief ways that leaders are depicted is as a shepherd who's supposed to care for sheep. In Numbers 27, 16 to 17, Moses asked God to appoint a leader after his death so that the people won't be like sheep without a shepherd. That's a callback directly to our verse. Ezekiel 34, God rebukes Israel's shepherds because they're selfish and they use the people for their own gain. In Zechariah 10:2, God says the people are afflicted because they don't have a shepherd. So here's the takeaway. Here's what Matthew is showing us. Jesus is the long-awaited shepherd. He's the one that's promised through Moses and Ezekiel and Zechariah, not just somebody who's going to care for the people, but he's going to, as John would say in John 10, lay down his life for the sheep. Here's what the shepherd does. He sees the people. He saw the crowds. And I don't think this is meant to just be a note to us about Jesus. It's supposed to invite us in because we're supposed to follow him. If he sees the crowds, we should see the crowds, the people. he feels, we should feel. If he acts, we should act. It's the title of the message. See, feel, and act. First thing. Point number one. Jesus sees that the people are harassed and helpless. So he's gone around this first year of ministry, and the thing Jesus comes away with after doing ministry for a year is this. These people are broken, and they're hurting, and they need a shepherd. He doesn't identify the people as problems. He sees that they're afflicted, which is something I think a lot of us are guilty of. We look at people and we identify them by their struggle. And then if we identify them by their struggle, then we don't necessarily have to deal with them anymore. Because that's kind of just what they are. What can we do about it? Jesus doesn't do that. He sees that these people are harassed. That word harassed, go to that next slide. The word harassed means that they're torn. They're torn up. And the word helpless literally means they've been cast aside. So they've been torn up and they've been thrown away like garbage. That's what Jesus sees. And if you can't see people torn up by the stuff of life right now, you're not looking. In fact, I venture to say there's some of us that we kind of feel that way this morning. You may have stepped into the room feeling like, man, I'm just torn up by the things that have happened in my life, and it feels like the world's discarded me because of these things that have happened to me. And there's a lot of people that are feeling that way, and Jesus sees those people. He doesn't ignore them. I can stay comfortable if I click, turn off the infomercial. I can stay comfortable if I change the channel. But if I look, so we're looking at people. Let's think about some of the things that people are dealing with. We got people who, their harassment is the family dysfunction. You just come from years and years and years. Divorce, brokenness, wayward children, all this stuff. And you feel guilt and shame over your family of origin. There's people that are torn by that. We got people in here, and I hope if you're battling with something that you don't feel like this is a room where everybody has it together. No, this is a room where every person in here is battling something, whether we want to admit it or not. Sometimes we try to be the holier than thou club. That's on us. But every one of us is battling something. And if you're in this room battling substance or addiction to something, you're in a great place to be. All right? And there's some people, they're torn because of the shame of addiction and the things they're addicted to that nobody knows, that they're hiding. There's people that you just live with a pervasive sense of anxiety and fear and depression. And you know the Bible says don't be anxious for anything. But that Bible verse ain't helping you. And you know what it says, and you know what James gets up here and preaches and said, don't be anxious, and you feel shame. Because I'm still feeling that anxiety. And we got people, your finances are just wrecked. And you're so embarrassed that at this stage of your life, you're where you're at. Torn. Some people in this room, you've been abused by a spouse, a parent, somebody, and they just torn. And you don't want, right? We don't want anybody to know this stuff. And then I think one that's getting a lot of people, because of the pervasiveness of social media, we're constantly scrolling these images of the perfect life people put in front of us. And we see people living this perfect life, their perfect house, their perfect car, and their perfect kids, and their perfect pets. And it's all just perfect. And you look at your life and you go, my life kind of stinks. And you feel like, I need to be perfect. I can't keep up with this. And you're torn. And there's people that are feeling this. And they're feeling not just torn, but then forgotten, cast aside. Here's what I want you to know today. Jesus knows all that stuff. Jesus sees it. He knows our brokenness, and he feels it deeply. And that should be our next steps if we're going to follow Jesus. Is not just seeing it, but letting it move us to compassion, because Jesus feels compassion. The word compassion here, I love this word, because it means to be moved in the inward parts, to feel something from the gut. Remember, the stinking ad, first time I saw those darn animals, it's punch in the gut. Do you know, Jesus sees your brokenness. And sometimes we put him at this lofty place, like he's God. Surely he doesn't feel stuff like we feel. No, he feels the punch in the gut for you. His insides literally twist when he sees your pain. When he sees that you feel like you've been torn and cast aside, it hits him in the guts. Now, I think this is important for us because it's showing us something. It's showing us that there is actually a time for an emotional response. We can be a little too intellectual at times. Sometimes you just need to feel something. Sometimes we just need to pray, God, I've gotten numb. I need to feel again. So Jesus is showing us there's a time for godly and appropriate emotion. Now, I know some of us, our greatest problem in life is that we're letting our emotions drive the bus. And if you let your emotions drive the bus, you're getting ready for the ditch or a head-on collision real quick. It's going to be bad, okay? So I'm not suggesting that that's what we do. And then there are people, they're just so stoved up, man. So stoic. Got the tough face on. Not going to feel nothing. If that's your philosophy, you're not being like Jesus, because he feels stuff. Jesus weeps. And I want you to know this isn't pity. The people around us don't need pity, right? Pity is this, I'm standing over you and I've got it together and I'm so sorry for you down there in your lowly position. That's kind of how pity comes across, right? Nobody likes to be pitied. This is not pity. This is Jesus actively in mercy stepping in, feeling what other people are feeling. The next thing Jesus does is he doesn't just feel compassion, he sees an opportunity. And he calls this opportunity a harvest. A harvest. Jesus sees the harvest. And number one, there's an opportunity. And number two, there's a problem. I want to talk about the opportunity first. Here's the opportunity. He says the harvest is plentiful. He says the harvest is plentiful. Like, I know we're so separated from the times of needing crops to come in. Like most of us aren't paying attention to, hey, how's the wheat crops and the soybeans and the corn doing? Like we don't think about that because we can just run to the grocery store and it's going to be there. But if you're in an agrarian culture, a culture depending on the crops to come in, if you don't have a good harvest, you're going hungry. And so harvest, Jesus says it is plentiful. This is great news. The harvest here is, get this, what is the harvest? The harassed and helpless people. So you just think about that for a second. The harvest is the harassed and helpless people. The people who have been torn up and cast aside, those are the people Jesus says, these are my harvest. What do you do when it's time to harvest? You go out and there's fruit on the branch. You pick it. You pick it. You go pull the corn from the stalk. You get down in the dirt and you pull the potato out of the ground. Why? Because you're going after something that you want. You're going after something that you want. Some of you got this idea in your head. What Jesus wants is perfect, shiny church people that show up every Sunday and lift their hands during the songs and they got it all together. No, the harvest Jesus wants that he's kneeling down to pick out of the ground are the harassed and the broken. He's pulling them out of the ground and he's saying, this is mine. The one everybody else has cast aside. This is what I want. This is my treasure. This is what I celebrate. Here's the thing about a harvest, though. Isn't this good? Like, because if you're the person that's feeling this way, he wants you. I want to tell you that. And if you're the person that you've forgotten that's who you are, you were the one harassed and helpless and cast aside, and Jesus pulled you up out of the ground. The psalm we read, out of the slimy pit, he pulled you out. Why? Because you were his harvest. Because you were what he wanted. You were the object of his desire. Harvests have an expiration, though. What happens if you don't harvest fruit or vegetable or grain in time? It's going to spoil. You'll miss your opportunity. So the next thing that Jesus does, he sees the people, he feels compassion. Then he goes to work. He decides, I'm going to work in this harvest. Here's how Jesus works the harvest. He preaches the kingdom, he demonstrates the kingdom, and he multiplies his authority. This is where we come in. Okay? I want to deal with this preaching the kingdom bit first, because I think this is really important. The kingdom Jesus was preaching, the gospel that I think Jesus was preaching, was not the same gospel as what we preach today. It's been normally preached. I think we've preached a somewhat shallow gospel. A gospel of, okay, you're a sinner. Sinners are going to go to hell. Jesus died to save you from your sin so you don't go to hell. You're not going to go to hell, you get to go to heaven. And that's the gospel we preach. In a nutshell, like that's it. Do I think that that's true? Yeah. I think it's lacking, though. I think there's more. I think the good news of the kingdom isn't let's just make sure we say a prayer and then try not to sin. That's what we've made the gospel in church. You say the prayer and then try your best not to sin anymore. The gospel of sin management. That's what a lot of us have preached. And I think the gospel of the kingdom is bigger. It's about Jesus making all things new, and it's starting right now. It started 2,000 years ago, but he's still doing it right now. Here's what Paul points to in Colossians. I want you to read this with me. Colossians 1. This is one of my favorite passages in Scripture because to me, this is the bigness of the gospel. Does it include Jesus saving sinners? 100%. But it's so massive. He has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son that he loves. In whom we have redemption and the forgiveness of sin. And the Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. He has first place, for God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through the blood shed on the cross. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior, but now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation, if you continue in your faith, established and firm. Do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. Look at what Paul says. This is the gospel that you heard. Not you're a sinner, let's hope you get to heaven. His gospel was Jesus is the firstborn among the dead. He is holding all things together, and he is going to reconcile all things back to God the Father. You have been given forgiveness and reconciliation, and now you stand holy and blameless in his sight, not because you are holy and blameless, but because he's declared you holy and blameless in his sight. This is a big gospel, and it includes the furthest star in our galaxies, in our universe, billions of light years away. That star, he's redeeming. 2, the quantum particle that nobody's discovered yet. That this gospel, all of it's being redeemed. All of it's being made new. All of it's being reconciled to the Father. This is the gospel. It's big, expansive. He also demonstrates the kingdom. This gospel should do something, y'all. This gospel should mean when we declare who this Jesus is, that we can say, hey, sickness can't stay here because our Jesus is redeeming. Yes? And this gospel should mean that people get delivered from demonic forces. Yes, I believe there are demonic forces at work in our world today. If you don't believe it, you just need to have your eyes opened. I don't know what to tell you. I don't believe there's a demon under every rock, and because you get a flat tire, the flat tire demon got you. Like, I'm not that guy, but I do believe that there are demonic forces at work fighting against us. And Jesus came. His kingdom is to deliver us from the forces of that darkness. And it also meant caring for the poor. Part of Jesus' kingdom was that he took care of people. He fed hungry people. And then the last thing that we see in him acting on this harvest is that he multiplies his authority. He realizes he needs other people to go labor in this harvest with him. And I think whoever decided to put the chapter break between Matthew 9 and Matthew 10, I think they got it wrong. Because I think chapter 10 should be part of this story. Because chapter 10 begins with Jesus praying and calling his disciples and then sending him out. And he tells them to do what he just did. I'm giving you authority. Go preach the kingdom. Go heal the sick. Go take care of people. Go, go, go. We just prayed for laborers. And guess what? Tag, you're it. Go. Instead, we break it up and we don't read the story all together because there's a chapter break there. I think it's wrong. Jesus didn't do his work alone. He multiplied his mission through others and gave them authority. And now, for those of us who are saved, he gives it to us. You are sent into the harvest with his name and his spirit and his compassion. And I believe there are people in our lives that each of us can reach in the harvest if we'll just heed his call. So Jesus sees the harassed and the helpless, and he feels compassion, and he sees the harvest, and he gets to work. I think that's a great framework for doing what Jesus did. We see, we feel, we act. I believe it's important for us to do the things that Jesus did, because as we come alongside him and work with him, we're changed in that process. There's something about putting our hand to the plow with Jesus to go into this world of harassed and helpless people, torn up and cast aside people. There's something about putting our hand to the plow and going with him that changes us. And I believe when we see that, we're going to see a harvest, and that harvest is broken people that need our compassion and need our action. I think there's only two responses we can have to the compassion of Jesus. We're either going to make excuses or we're going to obey. One of the choices preserves our comfort because it's comfortable to change the channel. The other choice causes us to join the shepherd in the harvest. Remember, I told you the harvest represented opportunity, but there's also a problem. There was a but. The laborers are few. You know what happened when I was reading that and I came to the but? I circled it and I went, Lord, am I the reason why this but is here? Have you ever had somebody giving you great news and then they mess it up with but? I mean, they're just telling you all the good stuff happening and then they go, but, wah, wah. And I looked at this and like, the harvest is plentiful we should be ecstatic out of our minds. This is good, but I don't have enough laborers. I wondered, am I the reason for that? I think there's a lot of us that have a but. I know this is silly. I know junior hires, I know. All of us have a but, not that kind of but, the B-U-T but, all right? Get your mind out of the gutter. I knew it was going to happen. I knew this was going to happen. Should have prepared accordingly. Here's some reasons where I can't go into the harvest. I'm so very busy. I know the harvest is plentiful, but I'm not really a people person. I know the harvest is plentiful, but I just don't feel spiritual enough. I know the harvest is plentiful, Lord, but I'm really pretty afraid of what they're going to think of me. I know the harvest is plentiful, but I don't want to be that person that's intrusive. I know the harvest is plentiful, but this could do a lot of damage to my relationship. Here's the one that I hope isn't true, but I think might be true. I know the harvest is plentiful, but I don't care. There's some of us that, if we're honest, it's probably true. I asked the question at the beginning, what happens when we stop feeling the compassion of Jesus? Individuals, for our church, the people who need it. Well, I think as individuals, it's that Sarah McLaughlin effect. We just get numb and we get comfortable and we change the channel. I think as churches, when we lose the compassion of Jesus, for our church too, it could be true. We'll become so inwardly focused that we don't even notice that there's a harvest out there anymore. And then there's people that need our compassion. You know what's going to happen to them if we lose our compassion? We may very well become obstacles to them coming to the one who can heal them. If we're the ones who are called to represent Jesus and they don't see any of his compassion in us, it may be a stumbling block to them finding the compassion that Jesus has for them. I want to ask the worship team and the prayer team to go ahead and come forward. I've got just a little bit more, but take heart. The musicians are up there. You know we're close. Here's what I want to ask you today. If you're a believer, if you've got a relationship with Jesus, you're walking with him, here's what I'd ask you today. I really do. I would really love for us to ask this question and then either come to the altar or sit at your seat or stand, whatever. But I'd love for you to ask, Jesus, do I see people how you see them? And do I feel for people the way you feel for them? And then let the Holy Spirit answer.